So on this fly, this is the larval stage, and this is the hydropsyche. So the hydropsyche, being a net spinner, has two little pro legs that stick out the back. And when you catch them, you may or may not see them. It doesn't really matter, but it's a feature that the fly that really does set the fly apart. And the tail on this is going to be a little bit of marabou, but you can use the Antron, Zelon. You could use a couple feather fibers just to give the idea, because when they spin their nets under the water, they use those two little legs and they spin those little like spider like webs. So, and then the body will be hare's mask, dubbing, a turkey shell back, and a little head. I tend to tie them between sometimes size 10 all the way down to 18s. If you get any smaller than that, you don't really need all the detail because they're just so tiny. So we'll go ahead and just start your thread towards the eye of the hook and work back right to the middle. And you can stop. And you'll know you're right at the middle there or towards the back of the so-called shank. When that hangs, just like with your saltwater flies, Drew, if that hangs closer between that point and the barb, you're in the right vicinity. So first, we're going to use the marabou. So if you have a chickaboo feather, it's fine. I'm going to use the base of a partridge feather. So when you pluck them, you'll see a lot of them have this little, sometimes they're big and sometimes they're small, but it's that little wavy marabou feather at the base. It doesn't really matter. If it takes you a couple, that's okay. You can also take the feather and pluck the marabou right off the side of the feather if it's long enough. And this one's so long that I can actually break it in half and use a couple of them. Like I said, Antron, Zelon, gray dubbing, any of that's probably fine. Mallard flank, CDC even if you had to. So I'm just going to take it and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep it nice and long, place it on the top, and do a pinch wrap right in the middle. And I'm going to wind back. I'm going to hold it, keeping it on top of the hook. And I'm going to wind backwards until I get the length of the fly that I want. You can go all the way down the hook. I'm using a really big hook, a size 12. I don't need, these flies aren't that big. So I will go a little bit into the bend and stop. And I'll go ahead and I'll get rid of that waste because I don't need the stuff on the top. Now the stuff that's hanging off the back, this little tail, you can keep it long, but the what are called pro legs, they're not super, super long. So what I'll do is I'll take about a half a hook gap and I'll just cut it. So it's a little stubby, bushy tail sticking out the back. And right there I have that. It's not very precise. If you want, you can even taper it and kind of shape it. Doesn't really matter. And I like to kind of run, once I do that, I'll run my thread up and back to clean it up a little bit. Good. So now the next feature of this guy, once you kind of get it trimmed and bound down, is you're going to take your gold wire. You need your fine gold wire. You can probably get away with small gold or copper. If you're doing the chartreuse version, you could do an olive or fluorescent chartreuse or any of that kind of stuff. I don't think it really matters. This will give it a little bit of flash, a little bit of segmentation, and a bit of durability. So I'm just going to take a length of it take it under the vise and bring it up to the top. So I already got it bound down. All right, and just go ahead and bind it in. So wrap it all the way forward and all the way down until it's secure.
Hate when that happens.
Every time, man. This is UTC thread.
That's the same stuff I'm using.
Yeah, I use it. I like it a lot, but it is not durable. What do you on Drew on your saltwater flies? What do you tend to use?
For like the flat wings and stuff, I use uni thread, but on pretty much everything else, I use the ultra thread, the UTC stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome. Sometimes I'll get a spool of it though that has like problems, and you'll start to tie with it, and it all comes off the spool.
Yeah. It starts getting like knots in the spool, and you have to like cut it all out. It's a pain.
Weird, yeah. On the flat wings, when I do flat wings and race flies and those things, I use the Danville, mono, and that stuff is awesome. You couldn't break it if you tried. All right, so now that we have that down, and that wire's hanging off, the side of the fly away from you, we'll go ahead and you'll take your turkey feather. This one you don't have to treat it with Flexament, but what I'll do is I'll buy them. I'll buy like 1 or 2 for the year, and I'll take a little Flexament in my fingers, or I'll dab it on the feathers, and I'll stroke it through, and it makes these a little bit hard once it dries. It takes 5-10 minutes to dry, and that'll make it so when you tie in your strip, you can catch a couple fish, and it won't fall apart quite as quick. So this is already pre-treated, but if yours isn't, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. So I'm gonna take this and pull out a slit. And you want it to be a good shellback size. So this one's modeled, I would say mine's maybe 1/3 of that hook gap to 1/2. It's nothing too precise. So just go ahead and you'll cut it out of your feather, and you'll tie it with the dull side or the bad side of the feather facing up. We're gonna fold it over just like a scud back. So I've got my strip, and it's really the darker side. Once you treat it with Flexament, the colors really pop. You're gonna want that side down when you tie it in, just by the tip there, so that it's facing, the bad side's facing straight up. We're gonna fold that over the top. So I'll go ahead and I'll bind that down. And you wanna make sure when you wrap back, you're going all the way back to right at the base where you tied that feather in. If you don't, you end up with a gap between the shellback and the tail. The trout probably don't care, but I do.
Isn't that always how it is?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't give a damn. All right, so I know in the notes I sent out a thing about the hare's mask dubbing. Do you have the dubbing already, or did you make it, or are you going to use something else? All right. Well, since I'm recording, I'll explain to people how you make it. So I've got just basically a hare's mask dubbing that I trimmed right off the mask. And then I take a little bit of Antron, Zelon, synthetic fiber, and I like amber a lot. Amber, brown, tan, any of those lighter shades, and I'll cut it off into 1/8 inch sections. And then I'll take that and for every 7 or 8, pulls of that rabbit, dubbing, I'll take a couple pinches of Antron and I'll cart it through and I'll blend it until it gets mixed in. So I end up with about 10 to 20% synthetic browns and tans and things like that. And the rest is the tan and gray hare's mask. And I usually do it in a large bag. So I have like a full year supply. If you don't want to do that, you can, Hairtron's fine, or a synthetic dubbing, or you can buy Antron dubbing and blend it, kind of save yourself a step. But I really like cutting it myself so I can control the blend. And it gives you that glow. These larvae in the pupa have a little bit of shine to them, and that's what the synthetic material does. How you make it doesn't really matter. If you're going to do the chartreuse version, you would do maybe chartreuse, a little bit of chartreuse Antron or Zelon, maybe some olive, a black, couple snips of each, blend them up, and mix them yourself. Nothing too precise. So go ahead, and you can dub a nice chunky body. If you've seen them in the wild, like when you're out there fishing, these little rockworms will cling to your waders, and they end up making they're like a little grub with a little brown back on them, or a gold back. They've got, they're kind of chunky. So you're not looking for a taper. You're really looking to make them kind of like grub shape. And you can overdub. So it can be pretty buggy and bushy. That's fine, because we're going to brush a lot of this out. And you're going to lose, 15%. If I'm fishing pocket water, I'll make them in size 10s and 12s, even though that's on the large side, because the fish tend to take the steak rather than the cheeseburger, So you want a couple of these tied in the bigger size, and you can do it with a bead too. You could always put your bead on first and tie the rest of the fly behind it. So you'll just dub right to the front. Got it. All right. So you'll end, about a hook eye back from the front, You don't need too much space. We're just going to bring the shell back forward, the rib, and then we're going to, give it off fly. So from here, now that this is hanging down right behind the eye, go ahead, pull up that turkey slit and bring it over the top. And when I bring it forward, I want it facing me a little bit on this side of the fly, because those wraps of wire are going to torque the whole shell back over the top. So it's really on my side of the fly at about a 45 degrees. And I'll drop the bobbin over, tie it back. And you don't have to, but I like to tie it off, fold the waist end back a little, and do a couple wraps over that to secure. And then I'll trim that off nice and tight. Yep. And then from there, of course, we're going to bring our rib. Now, since we did tie that shell back up on our side of the hook, you'll bring your rib up, nice loose wrap over the top, and then I'll pull straight down to give it that segmented look. I don't want the whole shell back to completely spin. So, you'll probably get 6 or 7 wraps, maybe 8. You can make it as segmented as you want. It doesn't really matter. You're going to add a little flash, a little durability, a couple wraps, fold it back, and tie off. And then you can trim. And from there, I'll go ahead and just do a whip finish. So from here, go ahead and I'll take I have a little dubbing brush, a little piece of Velcro, and I'll brush, buffing up the bottom of it. So right under the fly, I like to rub it back and forth a little bit just to get those legs out and get your fingers wet and kind of stroke the legs down, and you'll see those legs really go crazy. And from there, I'll take my scissors at a little bit of an angle because some of the back fibers are long, and most of the, their legs are in the front quarter of the fly. So I'll just take my scissors at an angle and clean it up a little bit so that most of the long fibers are towards the front of the fly. I know it's kind of hard to see there. Now I'm on the road, so I don't have a marker with me, but if you have a Sharpie, like a black or a gray or an olive Sharpie, now's the time that you want to go ahead and you want to darken it up. So you take it, hit the head in the first segment or two segments of the body, because their heads are kind of large and their thorax is kind of large. So you want to go ahead and hit that with a black or your color and let it go back a segment, maybe two, and hit the bottom a little bit because those legs can be kind of darker. And that gives you your color variation. I don't always do it, but it makes it very, pretty realistic. I don't really add glue to these either because I tie them by the dozen. But if you're gonna tie just a couple, you can always cement them. Sometimes I'll even take some UV and give it like a shiny shell back for fun. Totally your call. So, and that's Henry Ramsey's caddis larva. Super, super simple. All right, you got it. And it should be buggy, should be pretty gnarly. Right. So I figure the next one that we can do is a hatching caddis or an adult. You can do a hatching version or the adult. It doesn't really matter. The only difference is the first step. The rest of the fly is the same. And I find that most of the trout, take them when they're hatching rather than when they're full-size adults fluttering on the surface. If you want to do that, you could do an elk caddis or whatever. But the hatching adult is probably the most important. It's another fly from Henry Ramsey. You can use a straight shank hook or a curved hook like a 2488. But this is it. See right there, you've got, this is the hatching version. So this is a 2488. It's a 2X short. It's wide gap. But you can use it like a TMCO 100 if you need to. It doesn't matter. I've got a Z-long shuck off the back. More of that dubbing that we already made, or like your hare's mask dubbing. You can vary it. You can do the olive, the black, the tan, whatever you want. And then the front, which is your CDC wing. And that's it. It's how you tie it, which makes it really unique. Because it has a bullet head. I know it's a little hard to see in this view, but that's a bullet shape, a bullet style head. Super fast. I can tie 3 dozen in an hour and fill a box in an afternoon. Patrick is here. When we were fishing up north, these actually, well, if you get them wet, you get them wet with some Sink It or some saliva, you can hang them behind a dry and turn them into a wet, like a caddis pupa if you want. So they kind of serve two purposes. Pretty cool. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to use the 2488, the 100, the 101. Those are fine. If you have an emerger hook, you can probably pull it off with like a curved emerger hook. This is a little curve in it.
What size are you doing on this one?
You can do these. I do them as big as 12 or a 10 because it's 2x short. You can get away with the 10. Right. This is a 16 because that's all I have. I think the most useful sizes are 16s and 14s. Or in the pupa size, you could go down to like 18s and hang them off the back of a big dry. Kind of cool.
I like the 14s too.
Yeah, a 14 is a pretty good standard in the caddis world. Especially in this, because you're talking 2x short. So now we're down, it's really a 16 or an 18, depending on which one you use. And I'm just gonna, for ease, I'm gonna stick with the same thread I already used before. It's another one you can vary if you want to do a black caddis. You can do some all black with a black or gray wing. You know, Mother's Day caddis, you could use your Mother's Day, like kind of olive chartreuse apple color with a tan wing or an olive wing. So just go ahead, get your thread started and go back so it's hanging between that point in the barb. And then I like to go back, and then I'll go back right to the middle of the fly and stop. The wing on this guy is going to be tan CDC or brown, natural brown is okay. Whatever color you want.
For the tail?
No, we're going to tie in the wing first.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Because it's bullet shaped. You could do the tail first if you like, and then do the wing, the reversed wing later. I don't care. That's fine. So on the CDC feathers, I'm really not looking for the really rounded, thin tips. I'm going to go through my pack, and I'm going to try to find one with the nice, square, bushy tips. The Trout Hunter CDC is really the way to go because a lot of these are kind of useless. You really want the ones with the bushy tips. These are so-so. There's not too many good options in here. So I'll have to use more. If you have the square tipped ones that are really bushy, you can get away with maybe 2 feathers. But because these are rounded tips and they're kind of sparse, you might have to do 3. So I'll do the best I can. I think I have like 1 good one and a few bad ones in here. And I like to take them and make them face each other. So when I turn them and they're curved, they have a curved side, that the curves face each other. Again, do the trout care? Absolutely not. It's just me. Of course, it's windy, so everything's blowing around the, I got like $20 of CDC blowing around the room. All right. So you take them, you make them face each other as close as you can. And if they're a little long, you can go ahead with your fingertips, with your fingernail, and you can pluck the ends just to square them up a little bit. I wouldn't do it with the scissors because it looks kind of unnatural.
Just like marabou almost.
Yep. Have you tied with CDC before?
Yeah.
Yeah. This stuff is awesome. So you just square it off, try to get as close as you can to even. Stem there. So I'm going to go ahead, now that I'm at the halfway point, I'm going to wind my thread right up to behind the eye and stop it. And I'm going to take my wing and I'm measuring it, and it's the tips are actually going forward because we're going to reverse it. So I've got my tips laying over the eye of the hook, and I'm going to measure it so it's a little longer than the shank of the hook, maybe 1.5 or 1.25 length. It's nothing too precise, and if you get it a little long, you can trim it later if you really have to. Okay, so just take it and then transfer that measurement forward to right behind the eye. And just go ahead and do a pin trap. You want to keep that CDC all on the very top of the hook shank. You're going to do 4 wraps, 1, 2, 3, 4, going backwards. And I'm going to trim off the back right there. So it's kind of tricky to see, but that's what it looks like. And it's all on the very top of the hook. So when I fold it back, it's going to sit like a wing. And Drew, if you're ever going to do mole flies, that's another really good pattern from Charlie Craven. If you're going to do a mole fly, this is exactly how you tie it. You just won't fold the wing back. You'll keep it forward. And that fly is probably your best emerger pattern you'll ever find. So
I've never heard of a mole fly. What is it?
M-O-L-E. It's a mole fly. I don't know why they call it mole fly. I think because they tied it with mole dubbing, because that's really, really fine. You can do it with that or really fine beaver dubbing. Muskrat. I use muskrat a lot, or super fine even. And it's a vertical sitting fly, mayfly or midge pattern that sits straight up and down, and the wing goes forward like this. So when it's off the vise and in the water, see if I can do this. The fly actually sits up and down like this.
Oh.
Yeah, and all you do is you would dub the back half of the fly and then tie off. And that's all it is. It's just some brown dubbing or maybe olive or sulfur yellow. And then leave it like that, tie it off in front of the wing, and you've got a mole fly. And you hang that behind a dry so you can see it. And that's probably my favorite fly in the whole world. If you do it in brown in size like 20s or 18s, you probably don't need another mayfly dry fly for the rest of your life. It's crazy.
I'll have to try that out.
Yeah. He's got a video, and I have one up on YouTube that you can check out. So right there, I've just trimmed off the back, and I'm going to wind all the way back to the back of the hook. And I'll lay in, or you could do it in the middle of the hook. And I'm going to lay in some Zelon. You can use sparkle yarn, Antron, or a little, whatever you want for your shuck material. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to take a little bit, and it's probably 8 or 9 strands, just a little wisp, because I'm going to fold this over, so it's going to double up. So I think that's about 6. This you can use straight Zelon or crinkled, doesn't matter. And I'll go ahead and I'll loop it under, tie it in the back, a couple wraps, and then I'll fold over the tail. And now I have the tail, that little shuck of the fly back there. And you could do it towards the wing too and fold it back. I don't care, it doesn't matter. And then when I trim it, I'll do it about a hook gap in length. So I've got a little bushy tail sticking off the back. Nothing too precise. They really do key in on them. If you notice, sometimes they'll hit the adults as they bounce on the surface, but when they're hatching and first emerging, that is when those trout are going to go nuts. So now you'll take your dubbing, and I'm going to go ahead. You can use whatever dub color you want, but I'll go ahead and use that hare's ear that I used for the first fly. And I'll get a pinch.
Does it still have that Zelon in it?
Yeah, this one is the one I pre-blended that has the Zelon or whatever you want in it. But if you don't have to, if you don't want to, I just like it. There's something magic about it. That's really cool. But Hairtron dubbing, if you see the Orvis Hairtron or the Wapsi, Hairlon Hairtron, that already has some Antron blended in. You could kind of some of this step and just go for that. I also have like the ABCD cat. This is the caddis blend that Gary LaFontaine originally invented. And that's an Antron dubbing. So if you wanted to, you could probably do it all out of Antron. But this is, so just go ahead and give yourself a little dubbing rope, 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and just wind it forward with a little taper. And because you have the tail end of that CDC in there, you don't have to dub too much because it's going to have a little bump in the fly already. So just wind up right behind the wing. Right, and you tied off the wing right behind the eye. So you're going to give it a couple wraps there, and then I'm going to wrap 1 or 2 wraps backwards. And this is really important for the final step. So you wound all the way to the front, right to the very back of the eye, and then we take 1 or 2 good open wraps going back. And this is going to set us up for the bullet style head, which is our finishing wraps here. And I think, for the most part, this is another one of those flies that's the only caddis you're really going to need. And, as you've seen, you can tie them really, really fast. Okay. Just make sure, pull the wing up and make sure it's still up on the top of the hook. Should look pretty good. And then you'll take that wing. Since you've wound back a little bit, you can take the wing and fold it back. And I'll take, since I'm back a little far, I'm making my head. So right there, I have my little bullet head. So I've made 1 wrap, 2 wrap, 3, and 4. And now you can use your tool or your fingers, however you make your whip finish. And I'll brush all this back and make sure I'm away. And I will skip forward and whip finish right behind the hook eye. You can do it where you made your head, like in that little band, but I don't think it lasts as long. And I don't add glue to this fly. So I like to whip finish right behind the head. With a bullet style head, you keep your eye clear of all that dubbing, all the CDC. And now you have the caddis with the bullet style head. And if it's a little bushy, doesn't matter. You got your shuck. And on the curved shanked hook, you can do it on the straight shank and take off the tail and just do the body and the wing. And now you have the adult caddis. So you've done 2 in 1. When you go down to size 18s and 20s, 22s, you can get away with 1 or maybe 2 CDC feathers. For this one, because my CDC is so-so, I had to use 3 feathers. And then if you get it wet, you gel it up, and sink it, it's a pupa.
Can it be like an emerger pattern too? Like a dry fly emerger pattern?
It's a hatching caddis. So that's your caddis emerger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we catch fish on this on the surface if you gel up the CDC wing, or if you sink it, they'll take it under the surface too. Doesn't really seem to matter.
Okay.
It's a win-win. And then, like I said, you take off the tail, and now you have the adult caddis. If they're hitting that, you could even take your clippers on the water if they're hitting like the little flies bouncing on the surface. Trim off the tail, and they'll probably take it. So now we've done the larva, we've done the hatching caddis. Now we're gonna do the pupa. So we're gonna start again with a curved shanked hook like we did for the first one. And I'm doing this one really big so that you can see it. But it's really effective in the 14s and the 18s, maybe 16, the smaller sizes. This is a 12 or maybe even a 10. Another one had to, if you wanted to sink it, you could do a bead in the front if you needed to. Doesn't matter. And for ease, I'm lazy. I'll stick with the same thread. So go ahead and get it started. Wind all the way back. A little down into the bend. And then I like to wind all the way back to the front. So once down and once back. And that gives me my measurement for the entire size of the fly. Now from here, take a little bit of tinsel. Let's see, I think I drew my tinsel. I've got a little silver tinsel. You could do it with gold or whatever, or hollow tinsel, but this is just some silver tinsel. It's silver with gold on the other side. And I like the fine just because it's easier to kind of control. So I'll take it and I'm just going to tie it in and wrap all the way back. So it's on the far side of the hook. And I'm going to stop where I want my tail to end. These flies have a little bit of shine to them and a little gas bubble, and that's how they rise to the surface. They fill their carapace with air. They form that bubble and they float to the surface. So you need a little bit of shine because they glow under the water. So this tinsel is just going to be an underbody that gives us a little bit of shine and flash. If you're using Legarten or anything like that, it's going to give you a little bit of weight as well if you have a metal tinsel. So I've wound back and I'm going to wind up maybe 5 or 6 turns. And I'm going to wind my tinsel silver side up towards the thread. I'm going to make a little tag. If you do salmon flies, this would be your tag or your tip, really. So you have a tip and you come up a little ways, give yourself a little like shiny butt on the back of the fly. Make it as long as you want. It doesn't matter. And this stage is where you can make a decision. You can either have a tinsel rib, or what I'm going to do here for the sake of time is I'm not even going to do a rib on it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wind my tinsel all the way back to the front. So I'm just giving a nice shiny body to the fly. Nothing too precise. I'm going to wind all the way to the front. You could wrap your dubbing first and then rib it with the tinsel, but because I'm going to brush it out a little bit later, I'm going to skip that step. So now I have tinsel going down and back. The whole thing is silver. Doesn't matter. Nothing too crazy. Okay. I'll let you catch up, Drew.
I don't have the materials for this one, so I'm just going to tie another one of the ones we just did before.
Let's keep going then. So I've got the silver underbody, and I'm going to do open wraps back to the back where I ended the tip and stop. So I have a little shiny butt on the fly. Now I'm going to take some dubbing wax. The Wonder Wax or like the Loon Swax is really, really good because it's kind of sticky. It makes everything really kind of tacky. And I'll go ahead and I'll dub the first inch or two. And you got to be careful. It's kind of hot here, so this stuff is coming off like crazy. So I give it a little bit of sticky. And then you can take the same hare's mask dubbing we used for the first two flies, or in this case, I'm going to make it a lighter color. So I'm going to use a little Antron dubbing. This is just a tuft of Antron, and I'm going to cut it. If you have touch dubbing, you can use that. But I'm going to make my touch dubbing for the sake of everybody at home. So I'm going to cut it in little 1/8-inch pieces and fold it over. You're basically getting a really fine bit of Antron. So it's just kind of fluff. This is just for this touch dubbing technique. So I've used the tacky dubbing a little bit on the thread, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to separate it or card it and take little bits, little pinches, and I'm just going to touch the thread. And for this one, I'm going to make it a little dense. So I'm going to use quite a bit of it. I'm just going to press it to the thread, and it's going to stick. Whatever sticks is meant to kind of stay there. And I'll go ahead and kind of hard to see here, but I'll press it down and get it, make sure it's nice and stuck on there, because we'll brush it out. So now I have a real bushy kind of rope, but I'm not going to spin it on real tight, because you want that Antron glow to the thread. Got that on there. And I'm just going to take open wraps. I'll get it started. Nice open bushy wraps. It's right to the front. You want some of that silver to shine through. And I'm going to stop right behind the head. Now's the time. If you tied it on real bushy, you can brush it. You can rough it up, get rid of the excess. Pull off anything that comes off. And now you're left with kind of a real shiny underbody and a real bushy Antron body. And if you can do it really sparse, you don't even need that much. I can take off even more of this. So now you have that kind of shiny Antron bubble effect that the pupa have when they kind of rise to the surface. So I'm going to skip the wing buds on this because you don't really need them. They tend to break off when you tie the fly. In the first fish or two, they tear them right off the fly. So we can skip it because it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to you can take a wood duck or mallard. This is bronze mallard, nice barred feather. And I'm going to take off 2 fibers off of this guy. You can take off a bunch and then pull them off later. It doesn't matter. I'm going to pull them away from the stem, and I'm going to just trim them. So now I have a little bunch here, and I'm going to separate 2 out. So now I have these 2 here. These are the horns. So a lot of your caddis pupa, they have horns when they rise to the surface, which probably become the antenna. So if you're skilled at it, you can tie them in together. If you want, you can tie them in one at a time. I'm just going to go ahead and take them, hold them separated at a 45-degree angle, lay them over the top so they're a little past the back of the hook. You can see that there, little ways. You can make them big, long, or short. I'm going to tie them in. So now I have these 2 big horns sticking off the top, just like a salmon fly. And pull them to length. So they're just a little longer than the whole fly. You want them to kind of stick out of the back. So I'm going to take a few wraps. I'm going to fold over the butt ends, wrap that down, and then I'm going to trim that waist off. Now we're nice and secure. 2 little antennas sticking up. Okay. And you can go ahead. I'm going to come in here with my fingers. And I'm going to pull them apart so that they are, just to make sure they're separated. And I'm going to leave my thread right behind the eye of the hook for, to make the final step here. So this is a spiky squirrel dubbing. You can use Antron. You can use more of that hare's mask dubbing. You could use whatever you want. Super fine. It doesn't matter. I like this stuff. It's real spiky. This is the burnt orange, I think. Yeah. SLF spiky dubbing in orange. Burnt orange. This stuff has some really long fibers in it. It's got some synthetic Antron in it already, so you still get that glow. But it's buggy enough that when you brush it out, you get your legs and you get some of those, you know, these guys have little paddles, little arms that they use to flap towards the surface and swim. Some of this bugginess, when you brush it out, will kind of give you that effect of having some kind of legs and arms and feet, whatever the hell they got hanging off. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to go ahead and just dub it on real tight because we're going to brush this out at the end. So I'm going to dub it on. You can use a lot of dubbing because we're going to make it nice and bushy. And I'm going to make my head and I'm going to wind backwards. You want like a kind of a cone shaped head. Once you get back there, I'll double with a little more, just a tiny bit, so that I can start to wind forward. Nice open wraps. I'll pull it all back and I'll whip finish right behind the head. Get this nice and clean. Pretty good. You can glue it if you want. I'm not going to do it today, but trim off. So now I have the body with the silver underbody. I've got our little, wish I could make it a little easier to see, but I've got our little horns off the top hanging off back there, and then the head. And so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to take my little Velcro brush. This part's not necessary, but I'll just roughen this up and I'm going to stroke back towards the back of the fly. So you're left with a little bushy body, a bushy head. You're going to end up with a lot of this Antron kind of trailing off the back. And as long as it's not super long, you can just leave it there. When that gets wet, it's going to be nice and shiny. So you can see you got your horns, your head, and your silver body. Kind of buggy, super simple, and it's just an awesome fly. Patrick, this is the one that Michael Rubin found one like this in the bottom of the boat, and that's what he caught his nice fish on up on the Delaware.
Can't see the horns you did.
It's a little dark. They're real fine, but they're just hanging off here.
Now I see it. Okay.
Yeah, they're real fine there. They just extend right past the body. And you can, if you didn't put them on, that's okay too. You can, you could make a little wing of Antron or something, or other feathers, maybe some partridge. So that's the third, and then we'll go ahead and we'll whip out the spent pattern to finish it off, because it's really simple and it follows the lines of a lot of the other flies. It's actually probably the fastest fly in the arsenal of patterns to tie. So I'm going to use a straight shank dry fly hook. Again, 12s all the way down to 20. I think this one's probably a 14. Just get it started in your vise. I'm going to stick, because I'm lazy, I'm going to stick with that same thread color. And we're just going to go ahead, start at the eye, and wind all the way back to the back. And stop at the back of the shank. Super simple. This one you could tie like one every minute and fill up a box in 20 minutes. It's crazy. So once you get it all the way back there, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go back to that same hare's mask dubbing. Again, you can use whatever color you want, but this is the hare's mask with the Antron dubbing, the brown, the tan, all mixed in. But regular hare's mask is fine, or like Delaware River Club dubbing is cool, and the tan colors, tan, olive, black, chartreuse, gray is another really kind of cool color for this. And this is a really buggy fly. So go ahead, take off a nice pinch of it and dub yourself a nice chunky noodle. Don't kill yourself worrying about a huge taper. You know, these aren't going to be as chunky as the adults because at this point they've spent a lot of their protein and they're dying. So they've thinned up a little bit. But we can brush it out later if you put too much on. So I'm going to go ahead, make a little carrot shape, and I'm going to go 2/3 up the hook shank, even up to a quarter, within a quarter of the hook eye if you need to. So I'm stopping a little short. And this is real buggy. I've got all kinds of fibers hanging off the back. It doesn't matter. It's fine. So I'm going to go back now that I've got that tied on, and you can grab more of your Antron or your Zelon. I've got straight amber Zelon here. This is the Caddis Amber from Blue Ribbon Flies. This stuff is awesome. I use it for everything. But the crinkly Zelon or the Antron is fine, or Sparkle and Merger yarn is really cool. And it gives it that kind of glow that you want. I'm going to take a nice little tuft of this, and you don't worry about the length for now. We're just going to go ahead and tie this on, or you can loop it under if you want. And that's your wing. That's your first wing. This is your underwing. So got that tied on over the top. And I kind of want this one bushy. So I'll just go ahead and I'm going to fold over the front portion, the back, and I'm going to wrap over that. So now that thing is locked in. All this Antron totally locked in there. And it's really long right now. It doesn't matter. I think the Spirit River guys, they make the UV2 sparkle yarn. That stuff is awesome. You could use a longer dubbing, like even a Sinyo's laser dub you could probably use for this part. But I like the Antron and the Zelon. So tie it on long, and I'm going to come back just past the bend of the hook, and I'm going to trim it. You got it. And since it's the underwing, it's not your entire length. When we tie on the final wing, that'll be just a little bit longer. Those caddis tend to have their wings longer than the body. So we're going a little over with this wing, and with the final wing, we'll go a little further. So this is just past the tip of the tail. And I'll come in and I'll actually shape it a little bit, and I'll trim off and make it that nice kind of tint shape. It's nothing too precise. We're going to brush this all out later. If you wanted to, you could probably stop right there and fish it as a dry fly, and it would, I assume it would do just fine. Kind of like the CDC dry that we already did. How's it going there, Drew?
Good.
All right. So now I'm going to take this another partridge skin. And what I'm looking for isn't the really, really light stuff down here towards the bottom. It's too light and wispy. I'm actually going to go up here and look for one that's slightly darker. So this guy they're not very long, but they have some darker markings on them. And they're barred. I'm going to pluck off 2 of them. If you're making a really small one with small wings, you could get away with one feather. but this is larger, so I'm going to use 2, and I'm going to take these 2 guys, and I'm going to put them one on top of the other. And I'm going to get rid of all this fluff so that I just have the stems. It's a little easier to deal with. So now I'm just left with these little, and I'll compare it to size and get it relatively close. I may need to take off a few more. So now I'm left with those. And you know, you can tie them in one wing at a time because they're that tent shape over the top. You could do 1 and 1, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to save some time. So putting them one over each other so they match up in size. I'm just going to roll them around on my fingers a little bit. They really slim down to that nice triangle shape. So now we've got that. And I'll take that and I'm going to lay it over the top of the fly so that it's a little longer than the Antron or the Zelon wing. Just a little bit, and it's flat. It's not going to be up and down like a traditional wet fly or a salmon fly wing. It's going to lay flat because their wings, when they land on the water, when they're spent, are flat or sometimes they're spread open. So you want that triangle shaped silhouette so the trout see that when they look straight up in the air. So I'm going to take that, lay it to length and pinch wrap, and tie that in with a couple wraps. If it's long, you can pull it to length so that you've got your big tent-shaped wing over the top. If you want to be really precise, you can come in here and like take out the tip so that the trout see a little V in the top, but I don't think they care too much. So I'm just going to clean that up, wind down up towards the eye. And if you wanted to make antenna, you could leave these on here and color them up, and now you have 2 little antennas sticking off the front of the fly. But I'm just going to get rid of them here. So I got that done. Now I'm going to go back. My thread is stuck right at the base of the wing, and I'm going to get more of my sticky dubbing wax. And you don't have to do it this way. You could dub it and brush it later, but I like it really buggy. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get a little layer of wax on this guy. And I'm going to take my Hare's Mask dubbing, or you could use your brown dubbing from before, whatever color you want. I'm going to take a nice big bushy clump, and I'm going to pull it apart so that it's carded. And loosely in my fingers, I'll just take a bunch and stick it right to the wax. It's going to make a real big, gnarly rope. You can see it there. It's all over the place. And that's fine. You want it to be really, really buggy. This is just for the head, and this is going to give you your head, your legs, and that real bushy profile when they land in the water. So I'm just going to take it, and I'm not going to wind the dubbing on just like before. It's all touch dub. I'm going to wind this on a couple wraps, and every few wraps going forward, I'm just going to pull this dubbing back so that I keep all the fibers flowing towards the back of the fly. Once you get to the front, a few wraps and you can whip finish. And cut them off. Now we'll go ahead. You run your fingers through it. You'll pull off any of the excess because some of that dubbing will come off. And if you want to make it really buggy, you can take your brush again and you can rough it up a little bit. Because when they die, their legs are all out to the side, their wings are all frayed, they're crazy, and now you end up with a really bushy caddisfly. I'll pull it closer to the camera so you can see it. So that's from the side profile, and that's from the top. And then you get the underside with the glow of the antron. And that's a spent dead caddis at the end of the hatch there. If they're feeding and you see them feeding like, and you can't really see what they're eating, and there's no dries coming off the surface, you can throw that guy and they'll, you know, they'll catch fish. Or you can throw in the pupa, that pupa pattern. You can gel this guy up as well and fish him right in the surface, right behind the big fly.